I'm not a good person. There's really no other way for me to say that. I'm okay with that at this point in my life. I was dealt a rough hand my entire life, and unfortunately, I played the hand I was given. I'm not looking for sympathy either. It is what it is. So with that being said, I hope you understand why I'm telling this story anonymously. It's hard to believe now, but this story I'm about to tell happened to me almost 20 years ago. Back in the early 2000s, I was the worst I'd ever been. I was constantly getting into trouble. You name it, robbery, fighting, Grand Theft Auto, the list goes on. There was this one horrible night where I came awfully close to getting what I deserved. Back then, there was about a 6-month period when I played this little game. I would drive to a different small town in the middle of nowhere every couple of days. Because I never stayed in one place long, finding these little towns was very easy. There's literally a countless number of small towns in the United States. When I arrived in these towns, I would spend a little bit of time scouting the area and finding an old couple. My target couple would always be old and frail looking. It's hard to explain, but they would also have to seem weak. I know that seems vague, but part of my grift relied on them being mentally weak in addition to being physically weak. Once I found my ideal candidate, I would wait until it got good and dark, but not too late. Usually around 9 p.m. was my go time. That's when I would frantically show up on these old people's doorsteps begging for help. I would point to my car in the road and claim that it died. I would have some flimsy excuse, like my wife was in the hospital about to give birth, and I needed a phone immediately to call for help. Once the old folks would invite me inside, I would tie them up and rob them blind. I'd never steal anything sentimental, and I just did my absolute best not to hurt the old people. Harming them was never part of the game. I just wanted to rob them. Now that you all know how much of a trash bag of a human being that I was, I'll tell you about the night when this little game almost ended my life. It started just like all the others. I found my targets and got ready for the robbery. I pulled my car in front of the house a little after 9 p.m. I planned on telling the old couple my usual line, that my wife was pregnant and the car died. Sadly, this line worked every time. The location is important in this story, so I'll try to describe it the best I can. The house was basically the only house on this road. I think the next closest house was about a 3-minute drive. The front of the house was basically on the road. There wasn't much of a driveway. They had one old pickup truck, but that was parked on the side of the house in the grass. Behind the house were woods as far as you can see. Knowing the area was an important part of my grift because if things went south, I needed to know what the best way out could be. Since this house didn't really have much of a front yard or driveway, my escape plan was an easy one. At least I thought it would be. I put on my game face and ran to the door. I started knocking and screaming for help. An old woman answered the door. She didn't look scared or concerned in the slightest. With almost no sense of urgency, she asked what the problem was. I started frantically explaining that my wife was in the hospital about to give birth to our first child and my car broke down. I needed to call someone for help. The woman smiled. It was a rough smile. There weren't many teeth. She grabbed my shoulder and told me to come in. The woman's demeanor was giving me pause. Usually the people I'm robbing at this point are freaking out and trying to help any way they can, but not this woman. She cheerfully guided me in and told me to stand in the living room, which was the room just right of the front door. In a creepy voice, she told me not to worry and that I'll be okay. It was right then that this giant man walked into the room. I'm exaggerating a bit when I say giant, but he was huge. I would guess well over 6 feet tall and easily 400 pounds. He had a bushy black beard that stuck out from his face about 3 inches, but the two most notable things about this large man were that he was holding a hunting rifle in his hand, and he was not old. This man couldn't have been more than 25 or maybe 30 years old. Younger people were not as susceptible to my game, so this was a major oversight on my part. The woman spoke up and told me that this was her son, and he'd go out and take a look at my car. Before I could even get a word out, she shouted Hank at the top of her lungs. She started telling me that her husband Hank is in the other room, and he'd for sure help me. She continued yelling for Hank, and at the same time, her son went outside. I started to panic a bit because her son would clearly see that my car is fine, and I didn't think just rushing out was the best idea since he was walking around with that rifle in his hands. Hank limped into the living room where I was standing, and then he just stared at me. The old woman said something about helping me, and Hank just mumbled something under his breath. This is when I noticed the smell. Everything happened so fast once I got to the door that I didn't realize the smell inside the house was bad. Like really, really bad. It wasn't the smell of body odor, it was something else. Something worse. And that's when I decided it's time to go. I started creeping toward the door, and I saw Hank mirroring my movements toward the door. The old woman was also creeping closer to me and asking where I was going. She kept asking me what was wrong, and asking if I still wanted their help. I made up a stupid lie and told them I needed to get something out of my car. Both of them were closing in on me. When I was about 6 feet from the front door, I made a hard move and sprinted the rest of the way. As I ran, I felt Hank attempt to grab me, but thankfully, my youth allowed me to slip away quickly. For a split second, I forgot about their son outside. That intense moment inside had my blood pumping, and leaving was the only thing on my mind. When I got to the car, I noticed that all 4 tires had been completely deflated. As I ran closer and inspected the tires, I could easily tell that they were slashed. I didn't know what to do or what was going on. I didn't see their son, but I heard Hank yell from the house that I was outside and that I couldn't have gotten far. I decided to run into the woods. I know that's like a cliche, but hiding in the cover of darkness in the woods seems like a better idea than running on an open road. I sprinted deep into the woods for a minute or two, and then hid behind a big tree to catch my breath. I got down to the ground and did my best to listen for footsteps. Not long after, I heard the sound of heavy footsteps coming toward me. I couldn't move because that would clearly bring attention to my hiding spot. I was holding my breath and trying my best not to move a single muscle. The footsteps were getting louder, and they felt like they were on top of me. And I looked to my side, and 2 feet from my head was the old couple's son walking by me, swinging the hunting rifle in his hand. I think the only reason he didn't hear me was because of the loud sound of his heavy footsteps. I could feel myself shaking as he stepped by me. Somehow, he didn't see me and just continued walking in the dark. I waited for him to get out of sight, and then I basically crawled out of the woods. When I got back to the house, I still snuck quietly back to my car. I could see in the windows of the house that the old woman was just standing there looking outside toward the woods. Somehow, she didn't see me. I didn't see Hank, which led me to believe that he must have been in the woods also. I decided to do the stupidest thing ever, and I still can't believe it worked. I got into my car with its flat tires, and I essentially rolled down the street as far as I could before the tires were completely dead. Once I could hear them grinding on the ground, I got out of my car and ran as fast as I could back to the town.